Welcome to this episode of Reaching Minds Thoughts for Your Life's Journey. Today, we're going to be doing our 52nd episode of Reaching Minds. What an achievement! I never thought I would get this far doing podcasts. I can't believe that we've done this over the last 1.5 years. So, in this podcast, I'm joined by Heather Kelly, who's been part of the journey with me in doing these podcasts. I think uh, Heather has done about 15, 20 episodes with me together, and she's been promoting them and putting them on Instagram and so forth. So, part of the session today, we're going to be looking at, I guess, reflecting, recapturing, and sort of thinking about what were some of the key learnings did I pick up from the 52 episodes that I had with my guest. The majority of them were for my guest. There were a few where I decided to do them on my own, which was a bit scary. However, they worked out quite well. I was quite happy with them. So, as Heather has been part of my journey, we're going to do these questions, reflections together. Heather, what do you want to ask first in terms of the podcast that we did together?
Yeah, well, this is just a really exciting opportunity, I think, for like listeners to get to know you and some of the thoughts behind the podcast. So I suppose my first question is, what was your motivation behind the podcast and kind of like what drew you to creating this in the first place?
Well, I think the journey around building and doing podcast probably started about 2.5 years ago when I was speaking to some colleagues and it felt very scary. I don't want to do this, will somebody or anybody be listening to my voice? Do I have anything to say? And the most thing I was kind of scared about was being out there, and hearing people's criticism. However, fast forward to 1.5 years ago, we were coming to an end of a project that I had been working on for the last 3.5 years. And it felt very sad for me to sort of bring that project to an end. And a colleague of mine called Joseph Obona, he and I started having a short banter, and I said, you know what, I really fancy doing a podcast on endings. As we spoke about this, we gave birth, or I gave birth to the concept of reaching minds. And I will say that the support I had from Joseph was very encouraging. And he said, just go for it. And I thought, well, what's the worst thing that can happen in doing this podcast? And if people criticize me and don't like it, then at least I'm doing it. And as Brene Brown says, don't listen to the hecklers because they're not in the arena. I'm the one who's doing it. So that's where the idea concept came from. So we started with endings, and I think endings is a really powerful concept, and one that I felt as a coach and as a supervisor and a consultant that I thought we're not so good at doing that. Usually we're clumsy. Um, we don't honor it. We don't acknowledge it. We don't say goodbye to it properly. So I think it was sort of kind of bringing all of those things together for me.
Mhm.
And in terms of the ideas of what did I want to do with the podcast, I guess, being in the professional and personal development space, I wanted to reach people in terms of giving them a thought to pause on, a reflection they can think about. And I will say that when I sent out the first podcast on endings, I had a few people sort of send me emails sort of saying they hadn't thought about endings in that way. They hadn't thought about the different ways that we can end. So for me, a lot of stuff kind of came together. And the ultimate thing is that as I've grown myself in doing this podcast, I also want to leave a legacy. I think for me that's really important. And more than anything is to inspire people to say, "Oh, I can make a change. Oh, I can go and look at this." Because many of the guests that I've had are subject matter experts in their own areas, and they bring a lot of wisdom, a lot of thought to it. So if one idea can percolate in someone's world, that that for me is the gift that I can give to the world itself.
Yeah. And I think it's amazing that you've given a voice to so many people, like given, or not given the voice, sorry, but like given a platform for their voice to be heard. And I think it's interesting that at the start, that was something that you yourself were kind of like battling with, like, is my voice important? Do I have something to say? All these things. And I think it's been massively clear listening to all the episodes that you both have a really wonderful insight, and you've brought all these topics up, and you've kind of helped people to like share these views. So like I think that's wonderful. And I suppose my next question is, typically what guests is it that you are drawn to interviewing, and like and why?
Mm. But one of the concepts I had was that I wanted to have global guests. So not everyone who was based in the UK. I wanted to have guests who were from India or from the Middle East or from the US or from mainland Europe. So that concept was really important for me. And because I wanted those different voices, those different accents, those different nuances to be presented in my podcast. I guess the way I work, I still work in this way, is I'm very intuitive, and it's to do with what do I like, and what do I want to know more about. So, for example, one of the things that I did in a podcast recently was about AI, and I got connected to somebody called Rafael, and he was amazing. So I wanted to know, and he was an expert in that field. In fact, we're doing another one in February next year because the kind of 40 minutes we had just wasn't enough. So for me, it's about being intuitive and who I connect with, and what message are they having that I want the world of to for them to reach the world really.
Yeah.
So that's the way I work, and I was kind of looking at all the kind of subject areas that I've had from you know meditation, well-being, career transitions, leadership. And one of my favorite ones that I loved doing was a podcast with David Harris. And the reason highlight that is Dave came on the call and we were doing the preparation. And then he said, why don't we just do it? Why don't we just record it? And I thought, yeah, fine. Because we were having this amazing connecting conversation. And one of the things he left me with lots of things, but one of the things he left me with was be yourself because everyone else is taken. And I thought,
Mm.
wow, I haven't heard that one. So it kind of really inspired me. And there were other places, like my colleague in Mumbai, Sangeeta, who is a very prominent leading facilitator with women, and she did a podcast on finding your voice and safe space around women having career choices and finding their space. And another one that I thought was really grand for me, and it kind of was very spontaneous, was a woman called Winnie, who is an educationalist, but actually also a jazz singer. And at the end, I said to her, "Will she sing a song for me? You know, a song?" And she sang "Fly Me to the Moon" with
Oh,
that, and we didn't even rehearse at all. But I'd love to know how many people heard that. Um, so I guess when I'm looking at, there are various themes because they also connect with the work that I do myself
yeah,
as a carry
I
on.
was going to say that I feel like it's almost like a part of you is coming through with every podcast, like every choice of person you interview. It's like a little bit of like passion. So I was going to say, what as an individual do you bring to the podcasting when you're interviewing this guest, but like what do you feel as an individual makes this exciting, like about you and for you and this as a podcast?
I guess what the podcast does for me is it kind of harnesses my curiosity because the person who's on the other side who I'm talking to, I make an assumption, well, they probably know more than me, which isn't always the case. However, I want to explore their perspective. I think that for me is very important because their perspective might be very different from mine. And they might be bringing an angle that I hadn't considered.
Mm,
So for me, that makes it really quite exciting. And sometimes when a conversation flows off the page because we're not, using the questions, it's it makes it really powerful as well. For example, one of my very earlier on podcast was on journaling. Now I know nothing about journaling. In fact, we're doing another one for early next year at the beginning of January because I think journaling is a very important subject. And I journal myself, and I encourage my clients to journal because it's such a powerful tool to park some stuff or reflect some stuff that you may be grappling with. And my colleague and friend Jackie Holder was a great expert, is a great expert on this. So for her doing that, I learned something myself.
mm,
I'm always in this space around Heather that I want to learn,
mm,
um, because when I get to the stage in my life, I've got nothing to learn. I'll be dead by then. So it's partly I want to learn. I want to hear an angle around this,
mm,
and which I haven't considered. And sometimes, going back to your question, what gets me to do the subject? For instance, the one I did on kindness, I was on a bus coming back from a hospital, and a cafe in near where I live had kindness is your superpower. And
mm,
and that got me going. And we did a podcast on kindness because when I worked from, not worked, it's not the right word, when I led myself from a place of kindness that day, amazing things happened,
yeah.
and I know that it's not something I always have front and center in my mind. And when I do, amazing things happen around that.
But I think that's the point of a podcast, isn't it? It's not like the listeners listen and then they go away and it's in the forefront. It is that kind of like seeping into you, like the positivity, the lessons, the learning, the perspectives that you listen, and it hopefully stays with you. And as you said, it's thoughts for your life's journey. It's a guiding through life, and that's what's amazing, is that all of these things can just seep into your everyday life and impact the way that you're living, which is lovely.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that um, I'm also aware of because I'm of a certain generation as well, and I want to bring, people who are of the sort of five generations from baby boomers to Gen Zs. And one of the things in an earlier podcast I did with Andrew Middleton, and he runs an organization called I'm Not Done Yet.
Mm.
And he looks at ageism in our world and how when people are at certain age, from 50 beyond, what kind of things can they hope, because we're all living longer now. And certainly one of the areas that I want to do next year is the interaction between the sort of five generations that are in the workplace. What are some of the positivity? Because you hear negative comments around, oh, the baby boomers are responsible, or the Gen Zs are X, and everything in between. So I'm quite keen to do something around that, because it's not because it's topical.
No, because we
Uh,
all learn from each other. I think every generation has a perspective that the other probably isn't considering for whatever reason. So,
you're absolutely right, Heather, because we can learn. However, I think what we don't are patient with is the discomfort that
mm,
we can have with that, because we can become entrenched in our own perspective, and we can then stereotype or put people in boxes and sort of say, but they're that, this, the other. I think there is a lot of discomfort, and I certainly see it in an organization context, how different generations rub up against each other, and without recognizing that there is a discomfort,
yeah,
and we have to start doing something different around that. So maybe that will be one of my future
yeah,
podcasts that
amazing.
I want to do.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to sort of kind of circle back, that it is not only to do with the podcast around individuals, it's also to do with maybe some thoughts that can also permutate in organizations. Organizations employ people, and organizations now spend an awful lot of time and money on wellness,
Mm.
and I would question how much is that sort of superficial stuff, or is that really kind of deep stuff, that
People consider,
meaningful stuff that
yeah,
people they really want to create a change around that.
yeah, amazing. Has anything surprised you about the podcasting world since you've been doing it? Anything you didn't expect to find?
Did anything of it surprise me?
Mm.
I think all of it kind of continues to surprise me, because I do ask, are people leaving enough comment? I think what surprises me is that not everybody is into podcasts. I
Mm.
recognize that. And I wonder whether it's because they have no interest in it, or it's not something they ever considered. People often say it's a saturated market. I don't know whether it is a saturated
I mean,
market.
I'm sure it is, but I think we're just living in that kind of world where everything is a saturated market. It's the part of the world we're in. It feels very consumer. So I think yeah, I think everything is, and I think finding that pocket of conversation that perhaps isn't done is what's really exciting. You
Yeah,
know?
I
Yeah.
think so. And one of the other things it just it's I'm just reflecting on that the podcast has enabled me to do is to be authentic. Now, the word authentic, I have quite a interesting relationship with, because I believe people misuse it a lot
Right.
of what authenticity is, and I know that I will it's something that it's enabled me slowly along the way to have my voice being more authentic, and find a place that I can say something. And really, I don't care what somebody else thinks.
Yeah.
I can truly, in my being right now, thinking, okay, people listening to this podcast think, oh no, who is she? I don't care. You know, I think the most important thing for me is that there's a message, like everybody else who's trying to give a message. And if it resonates, fantastic. If it doesn't, well, you move on, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting going back to what you're saying about not knowing if everyone's into podcasts. Well, I feel like it's the same as anything, the things we consume are habits, and I find listening to podcasts, when you're traveling, maybe when you're on the bus, on your way to work, things like that, is is such a lovely way. And yeah, it doesn't all have to resonate, but you've covered so many different topics that there's absolutely something that's going to resonate with everyone at
Well,
some point. So
absolutely, because it's interesting because the podcast that has had the most listening is the
mm,
podcast on shame,
yes,
which
oh, that
is,
is interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's a lovely podcast, and it was my podcast number 4, but
Mm,
by far a lot of people have really listened to that because I think shame exist everywhere. And I know the work of Brene Brown, she highlights it. But the work that's been done on shame that my guests were speaking predates that in
mm,
some ways. I know she brought it to light, but it's been around a long time before then. So,
yeah.
that surprised me, actually, when you sort of said what surprised you.
Yeah.
That surprised me that people, shame is one of the hot topics, really.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, I suppose another thing I'm interested to ask, and perhaps to make it like more concise and put you on the spot slightly, but if you had to sum up this podcast in like 3 words, what would it be?
This one,
Yeah. As in your podcast, as in Reaching Minds in general, as a podcast, if you have to sum it up in 3 words, kind of how it resonates,
mm,
what would it be?
oh, I suppose the word inspiring pops into my mind. I want
Absolutely.
it to be inspiring. I want it to be educating for
Mhm.
people, and I want it to be, it's a word like takeaways for them, but I don't know whether that's a third thing. Maybe something around they can, if it
Like
kind of,
binding or
yeah, if
Mhm.
if they can put it into practice, then do it. Because I guess it's the same as when I'm coaching is, oh, I know what my third word is. So my
Yeah.
first word is inspiring, educating, and and again, this is something that I seek when I'm working with clients as a coach,
Mhm.
is transformational. That
Absolutely.
if
Yeah.
it can be transformational, it isn't always, and that is something that, from my coach training more than 15 years ago, that I inspire to be in this space, so that people can have different realities to the one that they have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they all fit perfectly, to be honest. So I suppose the next question is just what is the future of the podcast? How do you see the next 50 if you do another 50
Oh,
going? Yeah.
oh, do you know? I don't know about the next 50. I know that I work by 3 months in advance. So I'm mapping out the next few podcasts that I want to work on. And one of them is going to be on the future of AI. Another one is going to be on sort of supervision, in the importance of supervision for people who are consultants and coaches, which I think is such an essential part of their own professional development. I'm also going to do one. I'm going on a retreat in January to India. So I want to do one around my own personal journey of having gone through this Ayurvedic retreat. So I don't
Amazing.
know. I mean, I think those are some of the ideas. And as I said earlier on, Heather, that I'm very intuitive, and occasionally people approach me. I now get loads of people who want to do podcasts with me, and I go, yes, maybe. So I'm not always going for people that I know, but people I don't know.
Yeah. Amazing. Oh,
Yeah.
well, it's been so nice to be able to chat and actually and hear about some of, some of the thoughts behind the podcasts and the inspirations. And I'm just really excited to keep listening and hearing all the lovely conversations you have with people. So
Well, thank you very much, Heather, for being part of this journey and helping me to develop it as I kind of go along. And I appreciate those lovely questions that you've had a thought about that we're talking about right now.
not a worry. Thank you.
Thank you.